Hello again. Gary Stearman. Time for another edition of Prophecy in the News. And as promised, once again, we have author Bill Salus with us in studio. We're going to continue the discussion of his great new book, Revelation Road. So stay with us. Well, Bill Salus, welcome once again to Prophecy in the News.
Well, thanks once again, Gary. It's an honor.
And you know, the last time we had a discussion concerning your book. By the way, his book begins with a novel that speaks of current events leading up to the rapture of the church. It's a great novel, but his book, Revelation Road, also includes a number of very, very important studies concerning eschatology, Bible prophecy. Last time you were here, we talked in some detail about your view of the rapture of the church, the catching away of the church, and you have it somewhat more detailed, I think, than most people. Let's review that just a little bit and then move into a new topic that we didn't have time for last time around. We had talked about the fact that you believe that Israel is going to fight a battle in the near future and win that battle, and that there will be a greater Israel. Tell us again about greater Israel and how that idea fits into Bible prophecy.
Absolutely. Regarding a summary on the rapture, I do believe it happens before the tribulation, a pre-trib rapture. I believe it's an imminent event. It's a signless event. It could happen at any twinkling of an eye moment.
Okay.
And I went through the arguments that in the last show that we're not appointed to wrath. And the wrath is poured out during the tribulation period, and I get extensive commentary in the commentary section of Revelation Road on that. So I won't belabor that point right now because we're excited to talk about this coming greater Israel.
Right.
Now, when we talked about Psalm 83, the mother of all Mideast Arab-Israeli wars, which I believe is about to happen, the climactic concluding war, that pins Israel up against the nations and terrorist populations I call an inner circle that closely surround Israel. They share common borders with Israel today. They are not involved in Ezekiel 38. They're not listed there, which I find quite interesting. Why does Ezekiel 38 and 39 not list Israel's most notorious enemies in that coalition of populations and Gog of Magog invasion, which we talked a little bit in the last show? Interesting, why not? Because they're probably not involved. They're probably involved prior in Psalm 83 is my argument for that. Now, Israel, the Israeli Defense Forces, become an exceedingly great army in fulfillment of Ezekiel 37:10 and other prophecies that point out that the Israeli Defense Forces today exist in Bible prophecy. They win a war against the Arabs, and they can dwell securely, which is a prerequisite condition of Ezekiel 38 when Gog and Magog forms a coalition to come against Israel is dwelling securely in the latter days in the midst of the land, and they're very wealthy. Israel can, once they defeat the Arabs, they can tear down that partition wall that separates Palestinian terrorism away from Israel. They can dwell securely. They can spread their elbows out and grab a little more land like they did in 1967 when they almost tripled their size after the Six-Day War, like King David did when he won his victories 3,000 years ago, like Joshua did when they won their victories 3,500 years ago. Because remember, God gave Abraham land in Genesis 15:18 that goes from the river of Egypt, probably the Nile, to the river Euphrates, which courses through modern-day Iraq and Syria. Israel today only occupies about 9,000 square miles of that large, large area. Yet we have prophecies, Gary, that talk about Israel expanding territorially. Isaiah 19:18 says Egypt will one day speak the language, 5 cities in Egypt will one day speak the language of Canaan, which is Hebrew. One of those cities, it says, will be called the city of destruction. Interesting. Egypt is in Psalm 83 under the banners of the Hagarenes, as best we can tell. What about Jeremiah 49, verses 1 through 6? There's an alarm of war heard in northern Jordan, in Ammon. It says Rabbah, which would be around where the capital of Amman, Jordan is today. There's an alarm of war. Well, Ammonites are involved in Psalm 83. It says it will be a desolate mound. It says Israel will take possession of its inheritance. Well, that's right in the confines of that land description. I believe Israel, after the war of Psalm 83, spreads out and grabs more land. They have a pattern of doing that. They will feel justified in doing that. And you have a greater Israel that can also take over Arab spoils of war.
Just a second, because I want to, for our listeners' sake, I'd like to say this. Bill believes that Israel is far from the land that it will be after it wins that war. Today, for example, Bill and I have talked about the Temple Mount. The Israelis today do not possess the Temple Mount. That's in under the jurisdiction of the Arab Waqf, and in turn by the authorities of Jordan. And, of course, you've all read about how there is a great contest for territories in Judea, Samaria, and how Gaza was given away summarily to Hamas. And so Israel really is not this greater Israel you're talking about today, but probably in the near future will be.
Right, and let me be clear, too. When I speak about Israel becoming a greater Israel, I don't believe that all the land that God promised Abraham is going to be acquired after the Psalm 83 war. I believe that they'll get all the land when Jesus returns and sets up his kingdom. But I do believe they spread out and get other portions of the land. Meanwhile, after their victories, like I said, there's precedent for that with Israel. Now, let's take an example in Ezekiel 38, when Russia comes against Israel with its coalition, the Gog and Magog invasion. It says Israel will be dwelling securely in the midst of the land. Now, what land might Ezekiel have been talking about 2,600 years ago? He was not familiar with the UN Partition Plan Resolution 181, which gave Israel that little small notch of land in 1947. He was very familiar with the Genesis 15:18 landmass. The Hebrew word he uses in Ezekiel 38 is tabur. It means definitely in the center or in the midst of the land, which technically today would really be more about where Jordan is. Okay, so like I said, Israel, I believe, is going to, after Psalm 83, spread out a little bit even into Jordan. And how do we know this could be possible? Well, look at this. After Ezekiel 38 and 39, it says that Israel will be burning the weapons for 7 years, but they will be burying the dead for 7 months in a valley of Hamon-Gog, which is a valley that doesn't exist yet.
Right.
Hamon-Gog means the hordes of Gog. And they'll be burying the dead, probably, I don't know, 1 million or how many of these soldiers with Russia's coalition, in some valley east of a sea, it says. And
a very, very good point. East of the Jordan.
East of the Dead Sea,
and east of the Dead Sea, which they don't possess right now.
They don't possess that, but they will. Now, in my estimation, because you look at all the other seas, is it the Red Sea? Is it the Mediterranean Sea? They're not going to be burying dead people in cemeteries in Tel Aviv, so it's not the east of the Mediterranean. Is it east of the Sea of Galilee? Well, that's kind of under Syrian sovereignty. It's not a lot of valleys there. Really, there's really just one candidate. I go through that in Revelation Road. Why? But that's not all. What does Jesus tell the faithful remnant in Matthew 24, verse 15, when he says, when you see the abomination spoken by Daniel the prophet, abomination, desolation, head to the mountains, okay? He's actually telling them to go into the southern Jordan area. Why would they go there unless there was sovereignty possessed over there prior? Because presently that's under Jordan sovereignty. And so over toward the Petra area and Basra area. So I believe there's several arguments to think that after Psalm 83, before Ezekiel 38, and before the abomination of desolation, Israel has sovereignty over much of Jordan.
Well, I think you can see that Bill Salus thinks outside the box, and we love it. He's putting some detail into what up to now has been a kind of a hit-and-miss description of something we think is going to happen. For sure there will be a rapture of the church. For sure there will be a battle in the Middle East, but maybe more than one battle. And to make sense of everything, Bill has gone through Scripture in a very detailed fashion. The book, Revelation Road, will tell you in just a moment how you can obtain your own copy of it. Bill, let's talk about Iran. Everybody's talking about Iran today. Mahmoud Ahmadinejad's got to be one of the most hated men in the world. Death to Israel. Death to the United States. That's all he can say, and he believes he's going to be around forever. What does the Bible say about Iran?
Well, Iran is actually in end times Bible prophecy, and many people are familiar with them as Persia, written by Ezekiel about 2,600 years ago in the Gog of Magog invasion. Iran was Persia, changed its name in 1935. But there's another prophecy regarding Iran, written by Ezekiel's contemporary Jeremiah, in Jeremiah 49, verses 34 through 39. Now, we've spoken quite a bit about Ezekiel 38 and 39, so I think what I'll take is a little bit about what could Jeremiah be talking about with the Elamite, E-L-A-M, Elamite prophecies. Why was he writing about Elam, but Ezekiel was writing about Persia?
Yeah, and you know, if you look up Elam in a theological dictionary, it will talk about a race of people who used to live in Persia a long, long time ago, but they sort of became extinct, or they wandered to the four corners of the world, or they don't exist anymore. But you've probably got a little different take on that.
Well, absolutely. The Elamites show up even during the Medo-Persian Empire. Ezra talks about them quite a bit, which would have been back at that time. You have them in Acts 2. They show up at the time of Pentecost. They were a warlike people. We find that out. King Chedorlaomer, I'm sorry I messed that name up, in Genesis 14, when Abraham went to free his nephew Lot, was one of those kings. They were warlike people. Isaiah 22 says they were expert archers. The reason that's all important is they do show up in the end times. They show up in Jeremiah 49, verse 39, in the latter days, it says. They show up in Isaiah 11:11, in the latter days, when Israel is brought out of the nations of the world. They show up in Jeremiah 25, also in the latter days. So they are not extinct. And Jeremiah, what's interesting is when you look at the geography of Elam, modern-day Iran is more than just ancient Persia when these guys wrote. It also included Elam, which is where the Bushehr nuclear plant is. Iran's red-hot nuclear plant filled with Russian fuel rods that, if it got struck today, would probably create a nuclear disaster. And he seems to be talking about a potential strike of that area. And I don't know if we've got time before the break, but I would like to outline the bullets of what Jeremiah is talking about and how it could be a prophecy for our time.
Take about a minute to do that, and then we'll break, and I want to tell you how to get your own copy of Revelation Road.
Yes, Elam was a section that covered around the Persian Gulf. Its ancient capital was Susa. Jeremiah says, and he wrote, it's interesting that Ezekiel didn't include Elam in his prophecies. He was very distinct about who he included, and he knew about Elam because he writes about Elam in conjunction with Meshech and Tubal in Ezekiel chapter 32, but he does not include them in Ezekiel 38. Why not? Probably because they're not involved, because they're involved in their own separate prophecy of Jeremiah. It talks about Elam being struck at its bow would be broken. They were expert archers. They will lose their launching abilities to launch arrows or missiles, whatever the case is. It says they will be struck at the foremost of their might. Well, Iran's foremost of its might presently, if this prophecy hasn't found fulfillment yet, would probably be its nuclear program specific to that area of ancient Elam, where the Bushehr nuclear plant is. It said he will call the four winds from heaven and scatter the Elamites, and there'll be no nations where the outcasts don't go. It almost sounds like it could be a nuclear disaster with radioactive fallout and a dispersion that happens in that area. Now, I would just say this. When those Russian fuel rods were loaded in August of 2010, former UN Ambassador John Bolton said if Israel strikes now, it could create a nuclear disaster of significant perspectives. I've added that part on.
And as it happens, at this very moment, the United States diplomacy is wrestling with the problem of peace talks, quote unquote, with the Iranians, trying to dampen their nuclear aspirations, which I don't believe they'll do, as a matter of fact.
Well, no, and Iran is playing cat and mouse. They're buying time with the IAEA and the P5+1 nations that are trying to bring about resolution to Iran, telling them to stop enriching uranium, and they're just buying time.
You want to read a very good novel? Well, Revelation Road begins with a novelized version of the facts that we're talking about right now. And then the middle of the book has a series, I should say, of very detailed discussions of the elements of the prophecy that surrounds the events that are just ahead of us in the Middle East. Revelation Road, $19.95 plus shipping and handling. If you call 1-800-475-1111. Just ask for the book by Bill Salus called Revelation Road. As we always do, however, we're going to offer a package, a year's subscription to Prophecy in the News, plus a free DVD on Time Travelers of the Bible, a discussion between myself and the late J.R. Church about how the Bible actually speaks of time travel, and believe me, it does. And we're going to include this absolutely free with a year's subscription to Prophecy in the News and Bill Salus's book, Revelation Road, for $49.95. Just call 1-800-475-1111 and ask for the Revelation Road package. You'll get the year's subscription to Prophecy in the News, the free DVD, and Bill's book. It'd be about a $65 value. Yours for $49.95. Again, that number, 1-800-475-1111. Ask for either Revelation Road or the Revelation Road package. Now, we have quite a bit of time left, Bill, to flesh out what we're talking about right now. Let's continue with Iran in Bible prophecy and relate that to the catching away of the church, to Israel's victories upcoming in the Middle East.
Okay, we're going to cover a lot of ground with all that.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, well, continuing on with the prophecy of Elam with Jeremiah 49, there appears to be a scattering as a result of Iran being struck at the foremost of its might. And, the reason for this, Gary, the Lord does not levy random judgments. There's a reason for judgments. And it says in the midst of these prophecies that Iran has done something to fiercely anger the Lord. This brings us to a very important point. Israel today is relevant. God has big plans for little Israel. We're told in Ezekiel 39:7 he's going to uphold his holy name in the midst of his people Israel, that the nation shall know he's the Lord. Now here comes Iran with a nuclear program and a Ahmadinejad apocalyptically minded president, along with Ayatollah Khomeini, who wants to wipe Israel off the map, the Israel that God has plans for. Now that would fiercely anger the Lord in my estimation. So he then says he will break the bow of Elam, he will strike them at the foremost of their might. There will be a worldwide scattering out of the area, probably because of some nuclear fallout, maybe if it happens now. And it says no nation where they won't go. And it says Iran's enemies, Elam's enemies will see Iran will be dismayed before their enemies. Well, Israel's upset with them. The international community is upset with them. They've got sanctions going. Saudi Arabia is upset with them. Yes, Iran has some enemies at this point in time. And then he goes on and says a few more things. But the real catch here at the end is it says, in the latter days I will restore the captives of Elam. So after this all happens and they're dispersed, in the latter days they will be restored, meaning the good news for the Elamites is that they will have representation that goes into the Messianic kingdom. So it's not all bad news for them. But you're dealing with a prophecy that an area in Elam that Ezekiel didn't even include. He called Persia. He did not deal with Elam. He left that to Jeremiah.
Okay.
So there's a double jeopardy, it appears, for Iran in the end times.
Just to make it crystal clear to me and to those listening, when will Elam meet this destruction? At what point in this sequence you're laying out?
Okay, we don't know specifically, but what we do know is that it finds itself in the latter days, because I just quoted that Jeremiah 49, verse 39.
Do you think it could be imminent?
Well, I'm going to tell you my thought. I think it could be imminent. I think some of us believe it could actually be in 2012. Israel will strike Iran's nuclear sites, and if they do, and this is certainly on the news, it could be a fulfillment of this prophecy. The problem, though, is that could create a very apocalyptic condition in the Middle East, because Iran is heavily vested in Syria,
right,
Hezbollah, and Hamas. And I paint a picture in Revelation Road, inside the novel, of a chemical attack, a multi-front chemical attack that hits Tel Aviv and Ben Gurion Airport because of this type of scenario where Syria and Hezbollah are launching missiles with chemically laced tips into Israel, and Israel has no choice but to act expeditiously and decisively. And then you could have something happen to Syria. Damascus could cease to be a city in fulfillment of other Bible prophecies. Now we're talking about Syria.
Right.
This is another thing to be watching for.
Yeah, and actually Syria is in the news and will be for the foreseeable future, I'm sure, because Western diplomacy is trying to create a stable Middle East, as they always do. They cut up the Middle East in a way that pleased them back in the 30s after World War I, creating artificial borders. Those borders have been the source of hostility from then until now, and diplomacy seems to be at a loss concerning today's Syria.
Well, and again, we have several prophecies regarding Syria that are end times Bible prophecies. Now, some people, Isaiah 17, if we can start right there. Verse 1 says, Damascus will cease to be a city, it will be a ruinous heap. Verse 9 of Isaiah 17 says that there'll be desolation, that it says the children of Israel, there'll be the uppermost bough will be struck, the northern parts of Syria. Sounds like a big war scenario because of the children of Israel, it says. Now, some people believe that Damascus, the prophecy of Isaiah 17, found fulfillment in 732 B.C. when the Assyrian Empire conquered Aram, which is the ancient area where Damascus is. But what I point out is that Isaiah spoke in his 66 chapters 37 times about Assyria, and he never once mentioned them in Isaiah 17. Why not? He does talk about this being the children of Israel, probably in self-defense, that seems to levy out Damascus' destruction. And one last comment on Isaiah 17, verse 14. It says, at eventide you see him, referring to Damascus in the personal masculine pronoun, but in the morning he is no more. This is the portion of those that rob us, right, and it's a desolation scenario. So it appears as though overnight Damascus is destroyed, and Jeremiah 49 gives us more details, but it looks like you want to ask me a question.
Well, I have the sense here that we're talking about imminent events. What I wanted to do, and what I really wanted to ask at this point in time, and I'm sure our audience is just hanging on every word, because you're talking about Israel winning a major war in the Middle East and expanding beyond her present borders. If what you're describing about Damascus actually happened, that could set up a situation to allow Israel to expand. And at this point in time, then, Russia would not yet have launched an invasion into the Middle East, which we all read about in Ezekiel 38. So what are you doing here? Are you setting up then a sequence of events that leads to the Battle of Gog, of the land of Magog?
I am, and I believe it's possibly this sequence, Gary. I believe that whether it's in the order of Israel striking Iran's nuclear sites in fulfillment of Jeremiah 49, the prophecies of Elam, which we talked about, or whether Iran gets its proxies to actually strike Israel first in a preempt so that they don't get struck. That could happen as well. But I'm looking at some confrontation with prophetic implications with Elam that then triggers something happening to Israel, that Israel then probably has to deal with Damascus in fulfillment of Isaiah 17 and Jeremiah 49, verses 23 through 27, which also talks about something very important about Damascus. But I won't get into that prophecy because I'm going to sequence this right now. I think Damascus gets struck. I think Israel is responsible for that in self-defense. That may be part of Psalm 83. That may be the precursor to Psalm 83. That may happen shortly after Psalm 83. But any of these things I'm talking about right now will more than likely not happen in the tribulation period. These are pre-tribulation events.
Good. Now, let's talk about the pre-tribulation rapture, because last week we started this conversation with that idea. Let's go back to it, to the pre-tribulation rapture of the church. You believe it's imminent, but you also believe that the spacing, that is the time that would elapse between the rapture of the church and the signing of the 7-year covenant, the opening of the tribulation, could be a considerable length of time.
Well, absolutely. There's an unspecified gap of time. You brought this up in the first program we did together, where you said the old school of thinking pretty much was there's a rapture and then a tribulation, and there's only about 7 years or so after that tribulation, right, after that rapture. But again, we confirmed that it's the confirmation of the false covenant that starts the 7-year time clock ticking, not the rapture of the church. So something powerful will obviously happen after the rapture of the church. Now, I believe, just in a real nutshell, I believe the church is pictured in the book of Revelation in chapters 2 and 3 on the earth through the 7 letters to the 7 churches. They have several applications, but one of them was a prophetic applications as well. Then we see them raptured up in heaven in Revelation chapters 4 and 5. John's told to come up there. There's 24 elders there. And ultimately in chapter 5, we're all weeping up there. And Jesus gets the scroll. And he opens the scroll, which contains the 21 judgments, the 7 seal judgments, 7 trumpet judgments, and the 7 bowl judgments. And all of a sudden, judgments start to come upon the earth, but the church is raptured. We're pre-trib, we're raptured up there because the tribulation doesn't start until that scroll gets opened. The first thing that comes out of the scroll is the white horseman of the first seal, and that's the Antichrist we commonly teach. He can't even be revealed until the church is raptured, if we're correct in this thinking and in this teachings. So what happens when the church is caught up to heaven? Do some of these seals with the Antichrist and the four horsemen of the apocalypse, do they happen in this gap period? Does Ezekiel 38 happen in this gap period? Some stuff is going to be happening, and I believe the harlot world religion is going to come in that vacuum. They're going to have Revelation 17. They're going to have reasons why the church was raptured. You know, there's all kinds of things that could fit in there.
And that would take time, some considerable amount of time. Things cannot happen overnight. For example, for that as you say, the harlot world church, that has to take maybe some years to establish.
How does that happen? Who controls that?
Yeah.
How do you get a world religion together? How do you put a one world government together?
Right.
Look at the fiasco with the EU. They can't even come together.
Absolutely.
It's out of chaos that the mother of necessity happens, where these things start to happen.
Well, you're getting some small sample of Bill Salus's thinking that is expanded and detailed in this book, Revelation Road, which starts with a novel. It kind of gets you emotionally involved in the events that he thinks are shortly to come. But then after that, he kind of breaks these things down into individual categories so you can understand his thinking. And believe me, he's got some very valid points that other people simply have not come up with. The book, Revelation Road, by author Bill Salus, yours for $19.95 plus shipping and handling. All you have to do is call 1-800-475-1111 and ask for Revelation Road. Or, if you want the package, we would love for you to subscribe to Prophecy in the News. And so, with the book, we would include a 1-year subscription to Prophecy in the News and a little free gift to sort of add a little incentive, a DVD concerning the topic time travelers in the Bible. And this is a series of conversations that the late J.R. Church and I had on the subject of time travel and the Bible, which I think you'll find interesting. This package, called the Revelation Road Package, yours for $49.95 plus shipping and handling. It would ordinarily be about a $65 value, yours for $49.95. Just ask for the Revelation Road Package when you call 1-800-475-1111. Well, Bill, we have seconds left. You and I could talk for another day, I suppose. You have so much to say. And we do appreciate your having come and shared your ideas with us.
Well, thank you, Gary. It's been a privilege and an honor. And I guess my last comments to your audience is that apocalyptic events that were predicted appear to be about to happen. And are you ready for them? And are you using them to witness to your loved ones, to know that the hour is near? The return of Christ is soon imminent in the rapture?
Well said, Bill Salus. Great to have you here. And I'm Gary Stearman. Keep looking up, everybody.
Prophecy in the News is a viewer-supported ministry sponsored by our many friends across America and in your area. For your gift of $10, you can receive a special edition of our current program on audio tape, or for a gift of $20, we'll send you our programs on videotape. For either order, call the 800 number on your screen right now.